She was the Sabbath school teacher, the woman little Summer Wells once clung to and called like another mom. Yet after the 5-year-old vanished, her name became one of the most debated in the entire case. Robin Lane, a symbol of hope or the center of suspicion? That night, instead of rushing to the Wells home, she went back to her own house, left her child with her husband, gathered flashlights, and even packed snacks. A tiny detail, but one that sparked years of controversy. Tonight on Crime Wisp, we are not accusing anyone. We are retracing the bonds, the hesitation, the empty chair, the whispers about religion, and the names David Dodson, Tim Mullins, and the mysterious red pickup truck. To understand why Robin remains both the keeper of memory and a lightning rod for doubt. When people who attended the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Kingsport remember little Summer Wells, one memory always stands out. She would come through the doors on Sabbath mornings, and, instead of sitting quietly in the pews with her family, she often darted forward. Her small feet carried her up the platform steps where her teacher, Robin Lane, was leading songs or preparing for class. It wasn't hesitation. It wasn't shyness. It was instinct. Summer would run straight to Robin, climb into her arms, and cling to her with the kind of fierce affection that everyone in the room could see. Robin herself would later call it snuggles. She said that Summer was like another daughter to her, a little girl she cherished in ways that went beyond the normal bond between teacher and student. Those words were not casual. They described an intimacy unusual in most church settings. Plenty of children show affection to teachers, but there are boundaries. For Summer, the boundary blurred. She wrapped herself around Robin as though she were family, and Robin embraced that role. At the time, it seemed heartwarming. A small child finding comfort in a trusted adult. But when Summer vanished on June 15th, 2021, that bond, so visible, so well known, became one of the very reasons Robin found herself under a microscope. Investigators and communities often look not only at family members, but at anyone with extraordinary access to a child, babysitters, neighbors, coaches, and yes, teachers. Robin was not just another church member. She was a figure Summer reached for instinctively. And in the unforgiving logic of true crime speculation, closeness often becomes grounds for suspicion. On that June evening, after Summer was reported missing, the first waves of panic spread quickly. Candace Bly, Summer's mother, frantically reached out to Robin. According to Robin, her phone rang multiple times. Candace was FaceTiming her, choking back panic, insisting that Summer was gone. These were not casual calls. They were the calls of a desperate parent trying to pull others into her terror, trying to make the nightmare real by forcing someone else to hear it. What happened next is what transformed Robin from a grieving teacher into a lightning rod. Instead of immediately jumping in her car and racing down Ben Hill Road to the Wells property, Robin went home first. She described making a set of practical choices. She handed her own child over to her husband so she would be free to help. She gathered flashlights, reasoning that the search would likely extend into the woods after dark. And then came the detail that has haunted her ever since. She packed snacks. By her own account, Robin thought about the long night ahead and prepared food. She later explained that she wanted to be ready to endure hours in the woods, searching with others, and that bringing something to eat was simply preparation. But in the minds of many, it was the wrong kind of preparation. They asked, who thinks about granola bars or chips when a 5-year-old child is missing? Who stops to grab food instead of rushing to the scene? Robin did not arrive on Ben Hill Road until around 9 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the first alarm was raised. To some, her delay sounded perfectly reasonable. A mother securing her own child, making sure she had light for the search, and ensuring she would not have to abandon the effort because of hunger. To others, it was indefensible. If Summer was truly like another daughter, why wasn't there an immediate rush, a frantic sprint, a single-minded urgency to get to the Wells home? This single decision, this pause to prepare, became the foundation of suspicion. Online forums, YouTube panels, and Facebook groups seized on the story. Every time Robin's name was mentioned, the snacks and flashlights detail was repeated. It became a kind of shorthand, a brand stamped on her public image. Psychologists call this the availability heuristic. Out of all the details Robin provided, this one stood out because it was unusual, unexpected. People remembered it, repeated it, and used it to define her entire response. What followed was a split in interpretation. One camp viewed Robin's behavior through the lens of psychology. They argued that in moments of crisis, denial often takes strange forms. It doesn't always look like disbelief. Sometimes it looks like delay. People act as though the situation is less urgent than it really is, because their minds cannot process the full weight of the catastrophe. By gathering supplies, Robin may have been unconsciously cushioning herself against panic. The act of preparing, however mundane, gave her a sense of control when chaos threatened to overwhelm her. From this perspective, the snacks were not evidence of detachment, but a coping mechanism. The other camp was far less charitable. To them, Robin's behavior was inconsistent with her own words. She had claimed Summer was like another daughter. But if that were true, they asked, why wasn't her first instinct to drop everything, race out the door, and get to Ben Hill Road as fast as possible? Why was there even a moment to consider food? To these critics, the snacks were not a sign of coping, but a sign of calculation. They saw coldness where there should have been instinct, and that dissonance became a red flag. In the world of true crime commentary, small contradictions rarely go unnoticed. Once highlighted, they take on lives of their own. Robin's delay was dissected not just once, but repeatedly. It was replayed in discussions, magnified in online posts, and reinterpreted again and again. To some, she was overly calm, almost suspiciously so. To others, she was simply a mother trying to act rationally when everything around her was spiraling into chaos. What is undeniable is that this one detail created fertile ground for speculation. In the absence of hard evidence, no sightings, no confirmed leads, the public clings to human behavior. And behavior that appears off-script, that doesn't match the script of the frantic loved one, becomes magnified. Robin's snacks became symbolic of everything people found strange, unsettling, or inexplicable about that night. Her position only made the reaction fiercer. Robin was not just another community member. She was the woman Summer trusted most outside her family. She was the one who received hugs, the one who Summer called another mom. That closeness raised expectations. People believed she should have responded not as a neighbor, but as family. And when she did not, disappointment morphed into suspicion. It is a cruel paradox. The closer you are to someone who goes missing, the more closely your actions will be judged. Every hesitation becomes magnified. Every choice becomes a potential clue. What might be ordinary hesitation for anyone else becomes extraordinary in your case. For Robin, what may have been nothing more than a mother securing her own child and preparing for a long search became the single most ridiculed moment in her account. The snacks overshadowed her tears, her prayers, even her later involvement in vigils and church support. From then on, in the public imagination, love had turned into evidence, and proximity had become possible motive. And in the swirl of uncertainty surrounding Summer's disappearance, Robin Lane's decision on that June night became the most replayed chapter in her story, the point where affection blurred into suspicion. In every story of loss, there are details that become larger than life. For the disappearance of Summer Wells, one of those details was not found in a police report or a news broadcast. It was found inside a quiet classroom at the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Kingsport, Tennessee. There, among the small desks, crayon drawings, and well-worn hymn books, sat an ordinary child-sized chair. It was where Summer always sat, her small frame perched on it during songs, Bible stories, and craft projects. After June 15, 2021, that chair was never filled again. Week after week, as children filed into Sabbath school, they instinctively avoided it. No one instructed them to. No one had to. The chair became untouchable, a forbidden space. Sitting there would feel like betrayal, like admitting summer was not coming back. The empty chair became more than furniture. It became a symbol, a silent witness to absence. The children seemed to understand instinctively what adults struggle to articulate, that sometimes grief is expressed not in words, but in avoidance. They circled the chair, glanced at it, and moved away. Even without speaking, they honored the memory of their missing classmate. Pinned to the classroom wall were Summer's drawings, scribbles of crayon, stick figures, splashes of bright color, the kind of art every 5-year-old produces, uneven, joyful, ordinary. But after her disappearance, they took on a weight far beyond their lines. Robin could not bring herself to take them down. To remove them would feel like erasing her, and so the drawings remained, fading over time, but growing in symbolic power. Robin later described how heavy the atmosphere became. Each Sabbath morning, as she stood before her class, she felt the shadow of that absence. The chatter of children would soften near the chair. Their eyes flickered toward it and then away, acknowledging the void without daring to disturb it. One child, she recalled, moved close once, paused, and then quietly chose a different seat. The message was clear. The chair was still Summer's. Psychologists often call this phenomenon continuing bonds. When someone is gone, the people left behind find ways to keep connections alive. It might be a jacket still hanging by the door, a toothbrush left in a cup, a seat kept empty at the dinner table. For Robin's classroom, it was that small chair. It allowed the children to maintain their bond with Summer without needing words. They couldn't articulate their grief. They were too young. But their actions spoke loudly. For Robin, the classroom was both comfort and torment. Every week she faced that chair. Every week she looked at the drawings. And every week she repeated to herself, "I believe she will come home." I have to believe it was not just hope. It was survival. To accept the possibility that the chair would never be filled again was too heavy a burden. Faith became the only way to carry on. But symbols cut both ways. While some saw the chair as a beacon of hope, others saw it as a reminder of the finality of loss. The longer Summer remained missing, the harder it became to believe she would return. What began as a shrine to faith gradually became, in some eyes, a marker of denial. For Robin, keeping the chair empty was an act of devotion. But to skeptics, it became another layer of suspicion, another sign that her emotions and actions didn't fit the expectations of others. And that suspicion didn't stop with the chair. It spread outward, colliding with something much larger: religion itself. Robin was a Sabbath school teacher in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, a mainstream Protestant denomination. For most people in Hawkins County, the church was simply a place of community, a modest congregation tucked into the Tennessee hills where families gathered for worship, fellowship, and quiet stability. But in the atmosphere of online true crime communities, the church became a different kind of symbol. Forums and YouTube channels began drawing sensational comparisons. They placed images of Robin's church alongside footage of infamous cults. Names like Warren Jeffs, David Koresh, and Jim Jones were invoked. Clips of polygamous sects and fiery compounds were spliced together with references to Hawkins County. The insinuation was clear. What looked like a small, peaceful church might be something darker, a place of secrets. The reality was far different. Seventh-day Adventists are a global, established denomination focused on biblical teaching, health, and Sabbath observance. They are far removed from the abuses of cults. But nuance rarely survives online speculation. For those hungry for answers, the mere fact that religion was involved was enough to cast a shadow. Once doubt takes hold, facts struggle to catch up. The suspicion was further fueled by another piece of local context. the circulation of statistics claiming that Hawkins County had seen 17 unsolved murders or disappearances since the 1970s. For some, this was coincidence, the sad accumulation of decades in a rural region. For others, it was proof of systematic concealment. Every unsolved case was treated as another thread in a larger tapestry of conspiracy. And because Robin was both visible and religious, she became a convenient focus for those theories. She was not a pastor, not a leader of an institution. She was simply a teacher who led songs, told Bible stories, and guided children. But in the court of public opinion, nuance dissolves. Her visibility in interviews, her presence at vigils, her willingness to speak about Summer transformed her, in the eyes of some, into something larger. No longer Robin the teacher, now Robin the possible gatekeeper of hidden truths. This is the double-edged nature of religion in cases like these. On one hand, it provides comfort and rituals of hope. Robin quoted scripture, wrote songs, and spoke about light and darkness. To many, she was a spiritual anchor. But on the other hand, religion can breed suspicion when secrecy is perceived. People ask, what happens behind those closed doors? What traditions bind them? What truths are hidden under the language of faith? Robin's public grief only magnified this tension. Her vigils, her song, "Lay these children at his feet," her repeated insistence that she believed Summer would come home, these made her unforgettable. They carved her into the collective memory of the case, but they also made her vulnerable. Every prayer, every song, every public act could be reinterpreted. Some saw devotion, others saw performance. If Summer had been found safe, Robin's actions might have been remembered as heroic. If there had been an arrest, her vigils might have been celebrated as expressions of solidarity. But because the case remained unsolved, her visibility became a surrogate for missing evidence. The community, starved for answers, projected its doubts onto the people they saw most often. And Robin, by choice or circumstance, was one of the most visible. Her role illustrates a cruel reality. When a case drags on without resolution, perception becomes its own kind of evidence. A song becomes suspicious. A prayer looks like a performance. An empty chair, meant as a symbol of hope, becomes a daily reopening of the wound. And religion, which once held the community together, becomes the shadow in which doubt grows. In the end, the classroom chair symbolized not just Summer's absence, but the paradox of Robin Lane. For her students, it was a sacred space left untouched. For Robin, it was proof of faith. For skeptics, it was a reminder of denial. And for the broader community, it was an image that traveled far beyond Hawkins County, a haunting picture that embodied both memory and mystery. Robin Lane's faith-driven response, her prayers, her songs, her symbols, were never meant to place her at the center of speculation. But in the cruel economy of true crime attention, they did. She became both mourner and suspect, both guardian of memory and target of conspiracy. And as the years passed without answers, the shadow of religion and the silence of the empty chair fused together into one of the most enduring images of the Summer Wells case, a story not just of a missing child, but of how love, faith, and suspicion can blur until no one can tell where one ends and the other begins. When suspicion lingers in an unsolved case, it rarely stays fixed on one person. It spreads outward, attaching itself to anyone who happened to be close. In the story of Summer Wells, Robin Lane became the first focus outside of the family, but she was not alone. Two other names soon entered the conversation: David Dodson and Tim Mullins. Alongside them, the strange appearance of a red pickup truck gave fuel to speculation that has never entirely faded. David Dodson was a relatively new face at the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He had joined not long before Summer vanished, and at first, his presence drew little attention. But in the weeks after the disappearance, the details of his background began to circulate. By profession, Dodson worked in the funeral industry and also had experience as an EMT. On paper, these roles spoke of service, helping the injured, caring for the grieving, preparing the dead for burial. Yet for many in the online true crime community, those same details took on a darker tone. Someone so comfortable with death, they argued, seemed like an unsettling figure to be orbiting a missing child case. Then came his departure. Not long after Summer's disappearance, Dodson left the congregation. In a community already desperate for explanations, his exit looked suspicious. Why would a man who had just joined suddenly vanish from the very church at the center of the tragedy? Some saw it as coincidence, nothing more than an ordinary decision. But for others, it looked like flight, a deliberate attempt to distance himself. Forums and videos pounced on the timing, creating threads dissecting his past, his work, his words. There was no evidence tying him to Summer's disappearance, yet absence and silence were enough to make him an enduring question mark. If Dodson was viewed as the suspicious newcomer, Tim Mullins was framed as the enigmatic insider. He wasn't directly tied to Sabbath school or to Summer herself. Instead, his role seemed to emerge in the murky overlap between the Wells family and the media. From the early days, the Wellses gave interviews, issued statements, and appeared unusually entangled with online commentary. Some began to wonder, who was advising them? Who was helping them shape their narrative? Tim Mullins' name came up again and again. To supporters, Mullins was simply a helpful acquaintance, a man trying to guide a struggling family through a media storm they were unprepared to face. To skeptics, his presence meant something far more sinister: control. Rumors spread that he was orchestrating appearances, filtering what the family said, perhaps even protecting hidden truths. Once again, there was no hard evidence. But in the atmosphere of speculation, uncertainty alone became enough. Together, Dodson and Mullins joined Robin in a kind of secondary circle of suspicion. None of them were blood relatives. None of them lived in the Wells home. Yet all three had been close enough to attract attention, and in a community starved for answers, proximity was all it took. Robin was scrutinized for her affection. Dodson was scrutinized for his profession. Mullins was scrutinized for his supposed media ties. Each became, in the eyes of some, more than just an individual. They became symbols of larger fears. Then there was the red Toyota pickup truck. In the first days of the search, law enforcement released an unusual appeal. They wanted information about a late 1990s red Toyota pickup, possibly with ladder racks and faded paint. It was never described as belonging to a suspect, only as a vehicle whose driver might hold crucial information. To the public, that was enough. The image of the truck became a beacon of hope. If the truck could be found, maybe the mystery could be solved. And then Robin Lane said something that reignited debate. In later conversations, she confirmed that law enforcement had eventually ruled out the red truck. It was no longer considered part of the case. On its face, this seemed like a small but important clarification. But to many, it raised a larger question. Why was Robin, a Sabbath school teacher, the one telling the community what investigators had supposedly determined? In missing person cases, updates usually come from law enforcement. Ordinary community members do not make such definitive statements. By doing so, Robin blurred the line between mourner and informant. To some, her words were helpful, guiding people away from false trails. To others, they were too confident, too authoritative, evidence that she knew more than she should. The optics mattered more than the content. Even if she was simply repeating what she had been told, the fact that Robin said it gave her words disproportionate weight. People replayed the clip, dissected her tone, debated whether she was speaking out of compassion or out of hidden knowledge. Once again, Robin found herself in the impossible position where silence and speech both carried risk. Had she said nothing, people might have accused her of withholding. By speaking, she was accused of knowing too much. The red truck eventually faded from official conversation, but Robin's involvement in dismissing it did not fade from memory. It became another entry in the long list of details that shaped her public image. To her supporters, she was a bridge between a grieving family and a restless community. To her critics, she was entangled too deeply, part of the shadows rather than the light. In the end, the stories of Dodson, Mullins, and the red truck illustrate the same painful truth as Robin's snacks and flashlights. In the absence of evidence, perception becomes its own kind of fact. Dodson was marked by his profession and his exit. Mullins was marked by his ambiguity and supposed influence. The truck was marked by its disappearance from the narrative, and Robin was marked, once again, by being the one caught in the middle. Crime Wisp is not here to accuse, but to remember, to retrace, and to examine the pieces that continue to haunt Hawkins County. The story of Summer Wells reminds us how easily love, faith, and suspicion can blur. Until she is found, the questions remain. If you have thoughts, insights, or credible sources, share them in the comments. Don't forget to like this video to keep Summer's story alive, subscribe to Crime Wisp, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next case. Together, we can keep searching, keep remembering, and keep the light burning for Summer.